Hey heroes, and welcome to another time-traveling episode of History of the Marvel Universe. The subject of this video was voted on by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. You can also put your suggestions in the comments below, so let me know what you want to hear about. Today's tale begins not in the Marvel Universe proper, but in a divergent timeline, Reality 811, colloquially known as the Days of Future Past. There are a number of differences between this reality and the mainstream timeline of Earth 616, but one of the most important for today is the fact that the Dark Phoenix Saga ended very differently here. Now, I've talked about the Phoenix on the channel before, but to briefly recap, while returning home from a mission in space, the X-Man, Jean Grey, was nearly killed by cosmic radiation amidst a solar storm. In order to save her life, the cosmic entity known as the Phoenix Force sealed Jean away in a special healing cocoon while transforming itself into an exact duplicate of her in both body and mind. With the X-Men unaware of the switch, the Phoenix took Jean's place on the team, but was later targeted by the Hellfire Club's Jason Wingard, better known as the illusion-casting mutant Mastermind. As a result of his mental manipulations, the supposed Jean Grey was driven insane and temporarily transformed into the destructive Dark Phoenix. In this state, she annihilated a populated alien star system, catching the attention of the intergalactic Shi'ar Empire, who determined that she needed to be destroyed, leading to a conflict with the X-Men. In the ensuing battle, the Phoenix began shifting to her dark form once again, but in the end her Jean Grey persona maintained control long enough to destroy its mortal body, causing her allies to believe that Jean Grey was dead. In the wake of this, the Shi'ar Empress, Lilandra Narimani, gave Jean's father a holoempathic matrix crystal imbued with a recording of Jean Grey's personality so that any who held it could feel her presence. However, in Reality 811, the Phoenix did not replace Jean Grey as it had done on Earth 616, but instead possessed and empowered her. As a result, the Dark Phoenix Saga played out nearly exactly the same up until the conflict with the Shi'ar, during which time Jean did not revert to her Dark Phoenix persona and thus did not take her own life. Because of this, the Shi'ar Empire defeated the X-Men, but rather than execute Jean, they elected to subject her to a form of psychic surgery that completely removed her superhuman powers. Following this, the Jean Grey and Scott Summers of that reality eventually got married and later had a daughter named Rachel. But before Rachel was born, a major turning point came in this timeline when Mystique and her Brotherhood of Mutants successfully assassinated the noted anti-mutant activist Senator Robert Kelly. In the wake of that, a similarly minded politician successfully ran on a platform of anti-mutant rhetoric and won the presidency less than a year later. As a side note, some handbooks have referred to this president as James Martin, but more recent comics have clarified that it was this world's version of William Stryker. In either case, he introduced a radical Mutant Control Act, and while it passed with bipartisan support, it was ultimately struck down as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, in large part due to arguments presented by Matt Murdock. Undeterred, the federal government commissioned Project Wide Awake, a covert operation that produced legions of giant Sentinel robots. The Sentinels were deployed under the pretense of being a necessary deterrent, and over the following years they wandered the country, detecting and cataloging mutants. In the midst of this, Rachel Summers lived with her parents and the other X-Men at Xavier's School for Gifted Children. She befriended Franklin Richards, the reality-warping son of Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman, and the two eventually started dating. When Rachel's own mutant powers emerged, abilities similar to those of her mother, she adopted Jean's old code name Marvel Girl and became a member of the New Mutants alongside Franklin. At some point, Jean Grey Summers also regained her original mutant powers and resumed using the moniker Phoenix. Another important character we need to touch on here is Dr. Rory Campbell, a psychologist who was a member of Moira McTaggart's research team on Scotland's Muir Island. Much like what happened on 616, Campbell interrogated a mutant acolyte of Magneto named Spore in a room with a special laser web that would instantly react to signs of hostility. However, this safety net backfired when Spore used his mood-altering pheromones to provoke Rory into attacking, causing the laser grid to target him, severing his left leg at the knee. Bitter and vengeful, the Rory Campbell of Earth 811 subsequently sought to become a mutant hunter for the Stryker administration, leading government agent Henry Peter Gyrick to give him the nickname Ahab. Meanwhile, anti-mutant sentiments continued to build across the country, with angry mobs rallying against anyone with superhuman powers. Things reached another tipping point when Magneto attempted to shift the balance of power by seizing control of the world's nuclear arsenal. The government decided to move a number of warheads to a more secure location, but when a plane carrying them was hijacked by Mastermind, the X-Men attempted to intervene, with Jean, Scott, and Kate Pryde confronting him. Mastermind attempted to trap the X-Men in an illusion, but Jean remembered how what he'd done to her before had provoked the original Dark Phoenix incident. She struck with more power than intended, killing Mastermind and inadvertently arming the nuclear warheads. Jean attempted to contain the blast while Kate rendered Cyclops and herself intangible, but the force of the explosion proved to be more than she could handle. The nukes detonated in the skies above Pittsburgh, and Jean Grey Summers was killed in the blast. Kate and Scott survived, although even while intangible, the radiation burned Cyclops' eyes, causing him to lose both his vision and his powers. Furthermore, this nuclear explosion on American soil would prove to be the final nail in the coffin for mutant rights, and the very existence of mutant kind was essentially outlawed in the United States. The Sentinels were fully activated, and a number of them were sent to attack the Mutant Research Center on Muir Island, drawing many of the more powerful X-Men there. However, that would prove to be a distraction, as the military simultaneously launched a coordinated strike on the X-Mansion. At the time of the attack, Nightcrawler and his wife Amanda were walking a 14-year-old Ilyana Rasputina to the school bus. And because of that, those three were the first to die. As the others realized what was happening, many sought refuge in the Danger Room, and Rachel Summers begged Professor Xavier to join them there. However, he was determined to make a desperate plea for peace, psychically surrendering to the military forces outside. This would prove to be his undoing, and Professor Charles Xavier was shot and killed right in front of Rachel. Rachel herself survived the attack, but only because Ahab, now outfitted with a bionic leg, decided to take her captive so that she could be the first subject in his Hound program, a government initiative designed to use mutants against one another. Over the following months, Rachel was kept drugged and repeatedly brainwashed into submission, while her face was tattooed with marks that identified her as one of Ahab's hounds. With her telepathy allowing her to easily hunt down other mutants, she quickly became an invaluable asset and was considered his greatest hound. But at some point in the midst of all of this, the Sentinels came to the conclusion that the best way to achieve their broad directive of safeguarding humans from mutant dominance was to seize complete control of North America. Soon they were rounding up not just mutants, but anyone with superhuman abilities, imprisoning them in concentration camps where their powers were negated. Any heroes who opposed them were hunted down and eliminated, including Franklin Richards' parents in the Fantastic Four, who were killed by Ahab and Rachel. The Sentinels' campaign devastated the continent, leaving cities in ruins, while Ahab ruthlessly used his hounds to hunt down mutants on their behalf. But unbeknownst to him, Rachel stayed mentally linked to his victims as they died, further fueling her shame and grief. According to some sources, this eventually reached a boiling point, allowing her to break free from Ahab's control. However, a more recent account indicates that Rachel's emancipation was orchestrated by Kate Pryde and Lucas Bishop, the latter of which was a time traveler from yet another reality. Those two spent a year painstakingly undoing her programming before returning her to Ahab so that she could catch him by surprise. But in either version of the story, Rachel threw Ahab against a computer console that sent a jolt of electricity through his body, leaving him grievously injured and permanently scarring his face. She was quickly recaptured by a nearby sentinel, but now that she was an adult, she resisted any further attempts at brainwashing. I'll also note here that upon breaking free of Ahab's control, Rachel began psionically hiding her facial tattoos, an illusion that evidently persisted even after being outfitted with a power-dampening collar. Ahab ultimately survived and for a time relied on a special hover chair to move, but was eventually rebuilt as a cyborg to continue his mission. Rachel, meanwhile, was sent to a mutant internment center where she was reunited with Kate Pryde, Colossus, Storm, and even her childhood love, Franklin Richards. Along with a now wheelchair-using Magneto, the group plotted to alter the past and prevent the Sentinel takeover from ever happening. To this end, they contacted their allies on the outside and had Forge design a device to shut down their power-inhibiting collars. Wolverine and the Canadian Resistance collected the parts required, and Kate smuggled them into the internment center so that Franklin could assemble the jammer. With that in place, Rachel Summers used her telepathic powers in an attempt to send Kate Pryde's consciousness backwards in time so that she could prevent the assassination of Senator Kelly, which preceded their dark future. Kate was chosen for several reasons. While Rachel hadn't yet been born during the time of the assassination, Kate was a teenage member of the X-Men who hadn't yet been trained to fend off a psychic attack, making it easier for her future adult self to temporarily supplant her younger self's consciousness. Not wanting to put all their eggs in one basket, Rachel and the others also fled from the internment center with help from Wolverine, taking Kate's unconscious body with them while Magneto stayed behind to cover their escape. Unfortunately, the Sentinels caught up with them while they fled through the sewers. Striking quickly and without warning, the Sentinels targeted and killed Franklin Richards before he could use his powers against them. Devastated by Franklin's death, Rachel fought back and the others joined the fray. This group escaped once again and prepared to launch a surprise attack on the Sentinels' main headquarters, the Baxter Building, former home of the now-deceased Fantastic Four. However, this assault resulted in the deaths of Wolverine, Storm, and Colossus. Rachel stayed hidden and guarded Kate's unconscious body, hoping that her efforts in the past would pay off. Sure enough, Kate did succeed in preventing the assassination of Senator Kelly, after which her consciousness returned to her own time. Kate awakened in her proper body, but soon found that her own reality had not changed. Of course, the reason for this is largely due to the complicated and sometimes unpredictable relationship between time travel and the multiverse, and so when Kate's consciousness was sent back in time, it actually crossed over into the Prime Marvel Universe Reality 616. Wanting to investigate this phenomenon herself, Rachel attempted to send her own mind back in time, despite not having a body there to inhabit. Her disembodied consciousness followed the same cross-time back to Earth 616, where her meditative astral form hovered above New York City. Now, this was after the events of the Dark Phoenix Saga, so at the point in time where she arrived, the mortal body that the Phoenix had used to impersonate Jean Grey had already been destroyed, while the real Jean was still hidden away in a healing cocoon. Having resurrected in its true cosmic form, the Phoenix intended on awakening Jean, but upon returning to Earth it sensed Rachel's astral form and briefly mistook her for Jean. Curious, the Phoenix investigated Rachel's mind without her knowing and learned her identity. Impressed with the girl's resolve and ability to overcome hardship, the Phoenix Force sent a portion of its own essence with Rachel when her consciousness returned to her own timeline. Arriving on Earth 811, the Phoenix manifested while Rachel was still unconscious from the journey and spoke with Kate Pryde. With her world all but destroyed and her family dead, Kate pleaded with the Phoenix to help Rachel escape, and the Phoenix agreed. Rachel remained unaware of their deal, but the following day she and Kate mounted an assault on Project Nimrod, where an advanced Super Sentinel was being constructed. Kate knew that this was effectively a suicide mission, but once the two were inside the facility, she spoke the code phrase, Dark Phoenix, prompting the Phoenix Force to return to Earth 616, physically taking Rachel Summers through the time stream with it. Kate stayed behind to complete the mission, and while she was attacked by a prototype Nimrod, she ultimately succeeded in destroying the cyber-robotics laboratory with a nuclear explosion. She survived thanks to her phasing ability, although her proximity to the blast still left her with terminal radiation poisoning. Rachel, meanwhile, arrived on Earth 616. As another part of Kate's plan, the Phoenix also attempted to suppress Rachel's memories so that she could truly have a fresh start, but her powerful mind resisted and she still recalled parts of her life, like the attack on the X-Mansion. She believed that she had used her powers to send herself back in time and tried to contact Xavier, but upon reaching the mansion she came face to face with something that didn't quite make sense. A version of Ilyana Rasputina that was older than she should have been. Overwhelmed and confused, Rachel ran. While wandering the streets of New York, she caught the attention of the immortal mutant sorceress Celine Gallio, who pursued and attacked her. Rachel was taken in by a nightclub owner named Nick Damiano, and her telepathy confirmed that he was sincere in wanting to help her. However, he was soon caught in the crossfire and killed by Celine, much to Rachel's dismay. In the end, Rachel was rescued by Xavier and the X-Men, although she quickly noticed multiple differences between these X-Men and the one from her own future's past. Ultimately, she was forced to accept that the timeline she found herself in was not the one she knew, and she believed that she had somehow sent herself to the wrong past. She attempted to call this world's version of her father, but found herself unable to speak, and simply listened to his voice for a few moments until he hung up the phone. In the background, she heard what she thought was her mother's voice, not knowing that at this point Jean Grey was still thought to be dead, or that Cyclops was married to another woman, Madeline Pryor, who nobody at this point knew was actually a clone of Jean. Rachel did soon learn of the supposed death of her mother, which was one of the more upsetting revelations in this new reality. She initially lashed out, but ultimately told the X-Men who she was and where she'd come from, although it's important to note that Cyclops was not present for this. She struggled with the idea that she would never even be born in this timeline, which was worsened when she found out that Madeline Pryor was pregnant with Scott's child, and that the two would be having a son. After joining the X-Men, Rachel waited for an opportunity to actually talk to Cyclops about this, but one never came. In the meantime, she visited her mother's grave to talk with her instead. She also went to Jean Grey's parents' house, where she found the holoempathic crystal given to them by Empress Lilandra. Once again, remember, at this point the general belief was that it was Jean Grey who had become the Dark Phoenix and ultimately perished at her own hands. However, Rachel refused to believe that her mother could be corrupted like that and decided that she would claim her birthright and redeem the name Phoenix. This determination caused the dormant power of the Phoenix Force to awaken from within her. While her new costume and moniker startled Cyclops, the X-Men did ultimately accept her and she continued operating as a member of the team. Not long after that, Scott and Madeline's son, Nathan Christopher Summers, was born. Psychically linking with him, Rachel made peace with the fact that the timeline she was in was not her own, but vowed that she would protect her new baby brother. Meanwhile, Rachel's ability to use the power of the Phoenix responsibly was soon tested during the Second Secret Wars, when the Beyonder came to Earth. We've talked about him plenty of times on the channel before, but the short version is that the Beyonder was an entity with near-omnipotent reality-warping powers, but a childlike naivety and a lack of understanding of humanity that made him monumentally dangerous. The Phoenix announced her intention to end this threat, and the Beyonder in turn decided to test Rachel, endowing her with enough power to do so, but placing her in a situation where she needed to choose between killing him or saving the X-Men from Sentinels that he'd pulled from her own Earth 811. Not wishing to repeat the mistakes of her future's past, Rachel chose the latter, but questioned the wisdom of her decision. Suspecting the Beyonder would simply take his power back if she tried to attack him after that, Rachel hatched a dangerous plan. Stealing life essence from the X-Men to empower herself further, she tapped into the energies of the reality-warping Shi'ar artifact known as the M-Cron Crystal, and planned to release the neutron galaxy within so that she could destroy the entire universe, including the Beyonder, before restarting it without him. However, when she went to enact this plan, Rachel was connected to all life in the cosmos. Humbled by the vastness and diversity of it all, she realized that the power she commanded came with an obligation to wield it responsibly. She abandoned her plan and returned the X-Men's life force, much to the chagrin of the Beyonder who, turns out, actually wanted her to succeed. Rachel then returned the power the Beyonder had given her, but in doing so endowed him with the same feeling and epiphany that she had felt upon connecting with the sheer scope of life in the universe. The Beyonder left without incident that time and was ultimately defeated by the United Heroes of Earth, including Rachel, but for more on how those events played out, you can refer to my video on the Molecule Man. But in the wake of all that, the X-Men were wary of Rachel because of how she had forcibly stolen their life force. Furthermore, Rachel began regularly having nightmares of being hunted by Wolverine. Awakening on the subway after one such dream, she encountered a police officer who reminded her of Nick Damiano, the club owner who tried to help her but was murdered by Selene Gallio. Infiltrating the Hellfire Club, Rachel intended on killing Selene in her sleep as revenge, and the Phoenix Force allowed her to easily overpower her. But ironically, it was this attack that provoked Wolverine to actually go after her and intervene. Now, while he and Rachel were both killers in one form or another, he refused to let her outright murder a helpless opponent and went so far as to stab her to stop her. Injured and bleeding out, Rachel fled, using her telekinesis to hold her own wounds closed. In this vulnerable state, she was noticed by a six-armed sorceress named Spiral. By tempting her with a promise of remaking her in any way she chose, Spiral convinced Rachel to enter her facility, the Body Shop, and brought her to the Mojoverse, where she was enslaved by the grotesque media mogul for whom the dimension was named. As for how she got out of that mess, well, if you want to know what happens next, you'll have to let me know, and perhaps we'll come back later and discuss the origins of the UK-based superhero team, Excalibur. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members, all of which help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you will get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. And as always, if there is anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!